They were born to wear crowns, but trapped by their blood. For centuries, Europe's royal families married within their own dynasties to keep the blood pure. What they preserved in power, they paid for in pain, especially the women. This is the chilling truth behind the smiles and portraits. Infertility, deformities, miscarriages, mental decline, all buried behind veils of silk. And if you're drawn to real royal stories that reveal what history tried to hide, don't forget to hit subscribe to In Royal Europe. One rule mattered above all: marry your own kind. Kings married nieces. Queens wed cousins. Bloodlines weren't just protected, they were tightened like ropes. The goal was simple: preserve dynastic control, ensure heirs, and avoid common contamination. But the cost was rarely spoken aloud. Behind golden cradles and grand weddings, generations of inbreeding quietly began to weaken the very bodies they hoped to strengthen, especially the daughters born into crowns they would never truly control. Royal daughters weren't just symbols of beauty or diplomacy. They were genetic experiments in plain sight. Many were born with fragile bones, weak immune systems, and developmental issues hidden beneath powdered faces and heavy gowns. Some suffered from delayed speech, poor coordination, or chronic fatigue. These symptoms were rarely discussed. Doctors blamed delicacy or melancholy. But within palace walls, everyone knew, she's weak because of the blood. These weren't isolated cases. They were the direct result of generations of repeating the same genes over and over again. Known to history as Juana la Loca or Juana the Mad, this Spanish princess was a textbook victim of dynastic inbreeding. She was the daughter of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, both from closely related noble lines. From a young age, Juana showed signs of deep emotional instability, sudden outbursts, obsessive thoughts, long spells of silence. When her beloved husband Philip died, Juana refused to part with his body, carrying his coffin from place to place. But her tragedy wasn't just mental. It was inherited madness, built over generations, a mind collapsing under the weight of royal blood. The Habsburg dynasty was Europe's most notorious example of royal inbreeding, and their daughters paid dearly. Many Habsburg princesses were born small, sickly, or infertile. One was born with a cleft palate and never learned to speak clearly. Others had unusually long jaws, narrow hips, or hormonal disorders that affected puberty and fertility. While sons were groomed to rule despite their conditions, daughters were quietly married off, sometimes to uncles, sometimes to cousins, even when their bodies clearly couldn't bear children. To the court, their wombs mattered more than their well-being. And when they failed to produce heirs, they were blamed, never the bloodline. Born into the powerful Habsburg family in the early 16th century, Catherine of Austria was married off to King John III of Portugal, her own first cousin. From the outside, she lived a queen's life: jewels, palaces, servants. But privately, Catherine endured repeated miscarriages, fragile pregnancies, and severe joint pain that left her bedridden for weeks. Historians now believe she may have suffered from a hereditary autoimmune disorder, exacerbated by generations of close relative breeding. She gave birth to 9 children, but only a few survived. And behind her stiff court portraits, Catherine's smile hid a body quietly falling apart. Among royal women, miscarriages were common, but never discussed. Queens and princesses were expected to produce heirs, yet many carried and lost pregnancies in silence, sometimes over a dozen times. Doctors offered no answers, only prayers or superstitions. In reality, the problem often wasn't them. It was the genetic strain of inbreeding. Chromosomal issues, immune rejection, and fragile fetal development were all more likely when parents shared the same ancestors. But in royal courts, the woman was always blamed. Her diet, her nerves, her faith. Rarely did anyone ask if her bloodline was the very thing breaking her. Maria Anna of Spain, daughter of King Philip III, married her own uncle, Emperor Ferdinand III of the Holy Roman Empire. The union was praised politically, but biologically, it was devastating. She gave birth to 6 children, but only one survived infancy. Her health rapidly declined after each pregnancy. Court records describe her as frequently weak, suffering from headaches, fainting spells, and severe joint pain. Yet she remained dutiful, hosting ceremonies, appearing at masses, and smiling through illness. Her body had become a battlefield between royal obligation and genetic consequence, and the losses were quietly buried, one after another. Elizabeth of France, daughter of Henry IV, was married at just 13 to Philip IV of Spain, her first cousin. Their union was meant to strengthen Franco-Spanish ties, but it quickly became a personal tragedy. Elizabeth suffered multiple miscarriages and stillbirths. Her surviving children often died young. One historian noted that her court robes had to be frequently adjusted due to her constant illness and swelling. She battled anxiety, weight loss, and long bouts of melancholy, what we might now call depression. Yet portraits of her always show calmness and grace. Behind them was a woman grieving children, trapped in protocol, and worn down by bloodlines she never chose. For royal women, their value was often reduced to one thing: their ability to produce heirs. If a queen gave birth to sons, she was praised, even worshipped. If she didn't, she was discarded, humiliated, or replaced. But in dynasties riddled with inbreeding, the chances of healthy, viable children were already low. Some queens endured childbirths every year for a decade, bleeding, screaming, nearly dying, just to fulfill expectations. Their bodies were never allowed to rest. Even after miscarriages, they were pressured to conceive again immediately. There was no time for grief. Only duty. Margaret Teresa of Spain, famously painted by Velázquez, was both niece and wife to Emperor Leopold I. Born from intensely close Habsburg lines, she was described as sweet, intelligent, and heartbreakingly frail. She suffered from spinal deformities, constant fatigue, and early ovarian failure. Married at just 15, she became empress, but her health collapsed after childbirth. By 21, she had given birth to 4 children. Only one survived. Her body, already weakened by inherited conditions, could no longer recover. She died at just 21 years old. And the court moved on, planning the next match, the next alliance, the next girl to carry a name. And a curse. In the Habsburg world, blood purity wasn't just a value, it was an obsession. Marriages were arranged not for love or compatibility, but for pedigree. The closer the relation, the more secure the line was believed to be. But what they preserved in legacy, they shattered in biology. By the 1600s, family trees no longer branched, they looped. Genetic diversity disappeared, and the results were clearest in the women: infertility, birth defects, premature deaths. Yet no one stopped it, because to them, a broken heir was better than a diluted name. And queens became the quiet casualties of that mindset. Maria Josepha of Austria, born in 1699, was the product of generations of cousin marriages. From the moment she was born, doctors noted irregularities: thin bones, weak eyesight, and a nervous disposition. Though she reached adulthood, she remained frail her entire life. She was married off to Frederick Augustus II of Saxony, but suffered repeated miscarriages and nearly died during her only successful childbirth. Her letters, preserved in archives, speak of exhaustion, fear, and physical pain, but always written in perfect royal decorum. She wasn't allowed to be broken. She was expected to smile through her suffering, for the empire and for the blood that betrayed her. Look at the portraits of these royal women, and you'll see elegance, fine gowns, flawless posture, serene expressions. But what you won't see is the joint pain, the bleeding, the hormonal disorders, the child-sized coffins, or the years of silent suffering behind palace doors. Court artists were instructed to hide deformities, to flatter, not reflect. A queen's limp became a graceful pose. Sunken eyes were painted bright. But no amount of gold leaf could erase what their bodies endured. Behind every brushstroke was a woman trapped between royal duty and genetic decay. Unlike kings, queens couldn't rewrite laws or lead armies. They couldn't refuse marriages, stop pregnancies, or escape expectations. Their role was to carry children, even if it cost them their health, their youth, or their lives. In royal dynasties shaped by inbreeding, these women had the least protection and the most to lose. Their pain was politicized. Their grief was dismissed. Their deaths were mourned briefly and then replaced. They weren't raised to choose. They were raised to serve. And when their bodies couldn't survive what centuries of planning demanded, They were quietly erased from memory. Today, the remains of many royal women, exhumed centuries later, tell a different story than the portraits did. Crushed pelvises, curved spines, undeveloped ovaries, infant remains buried beside them. Science has finally revealed what history tried to silence, that the obsession with royal bloodlines didn't just end dynasties. It destroyed lives, especially those of young queens and princesses who had no choice. These women were called blessed, but they lived cursed. And now, as their stories rise from the shadows, we see them for what they were: the quiet victims of power, pride, and a crown that cost too much.